My dearest fellow humans, my name is Septima Tulisa, and I've come to be with you today from the future, from the year 2050. I was appointed in my time just 3 weeks ago as Minister for Future Generations, and I join you today to offer words of hope and words of warning. There is very much that I'm not permitted to tell you. I can't tell you how many medals China or India will win in next year's 2012 Olympics. I can't tell you who will win the Euro 2012 European Football Championship. But I can reassure you, you have the potential to transform the future. You can affect my future as well as your own. From my vantage point in 2050, and with the wisdom of hindsight, I and my fellow residents can see so many things that should have been done differently. Let me tell you a little about my world, where we stand together confronting the prospects of overcrowded, disease-ridden, lawless cities, useless infrastructure, wasted lives, and squandered potential. In my world, we look back and we see that we waited too long to act. We imagined that technology would deliver solutions to climate change, and many of us hoped that the climate scientists might have been wrong. As the evidence of great risks to the Earth's climate mounted, people and their political elites waited for technology to deliver, for great machines to be built to take control of the Earth's atmosphere, for nanotechnology, for the powerhouses of nuclear fusion to work their magic. As citizens and as politicians, we were diverted by the pressures of energy, financial and economic crisis. We behaved as though getting out of the economic doldrums that gripped us was all that mattered. Weakened by the recurrent financial and debt crises of the early 21st century, we failed to invest public resources in technological innovation. And with each failed global climate change conference and with each climate refugee, we became more nationalistic, more protectionist, more fervently a collection of islands. But so too did the nations that held the remaining fossil fuel resources, the oil, the gas, the coal. Nearly blinded by money, we forgot that our citizenship demanded real citizen activism. There simply wasn't sufficient public demand to raise our sights beyond the short term. We claimed that as nations we still believed in the world's greatest political system, democracy, rule by the people, of the people, for the people, even as other nations abandoned it. And yet, in our malnourished democracy, we failed adequately to vocalize our most urgent and powerful need to hand on to our successors a healthy planet and the knowledge and skills to thrive upon it. Then, at the beginning of 2050, mass protests broke out. 5 million people in our islands took to the streets demanding access to energy, jobs, shelter, and affordable food. There was violence, yes, and suppression of free speech too, but that had long since been a feature of our rationed democracy. And from the midst of the chaos, a few devastatingly powerful words from a 15-year-old, a first-time voter, let us say. I can't tell you her name, for she may turn out to be one of your children. She climbed onto an upturned hover bus on the Olympic wasteland of East London, and against all the advice from the protest organisers, she had left her communicator switched on. She sought no audience, but with tears in her eyes and anger in the voice, she asked, "What happened to our future? Where's the intergenerational justice in this?" There was more too, but I'm not permitted to repeat her words in full. And this young woman's voice from the front line of our island's protests of the 5 million passed through the airwaves from person to person and entered into the consciousness of an entire nation. It's hard to explain how one young voter's words can have the impact that they did. And when I prepared for this speech, I looked a little at our shared history, yours and mine, and I can see similar moments in your relatively recent past. In the days after the looting of your summer, this year, for example, when hundreds of riot wombles took to the streets and brandished brooms and rubber gloves to reclaim their streets. We're all leaders and we're all followers. And at times such as this, we can be both at the same time. The change in my world after the riots of the 5 million wasn't instant. But in mosques and church halls, in temples and in pubs, and in what's left of our community primary healthcare centres, people began to put her question on the agendas for their meetings. Where's the intergenerational justice in this? Up and down the lands of our islands, people began to ask themselves, how can we respond to her plea? How can we make intergenerational justice a reality? Across our islands, people signalled to their members of parliament that they wanted national government to respond to their calls for intergenerational justice, fairness for the present and into the future. People stopped talking about the crises of the moment, and community democracy committees began to be spaces to ask important underlying questions. What is it that makes us humans? What should we aspire to hand down to future generations? People saw that there were deep connections between social injustice in their present and the huge injustice that they risked handing to future generations. And people recognised that developing the capacity to pass down a healthy planet could have been what marked out their generation and the one before. That they'd missed an opportunity, but that it was never too late to take action. We realised in those days that the sole job of leadership and governance was not, after all, simply to balance competing self-interests, nor to provide more goods for consumption, or even safety and security. And like a hot wind whipping up the dusts of southern Europe, two old words began to be heard together once more: sustainable development. In my world, sustainable development had become discredited in the second decade of the 21st century. It became a phrase that elites used to try to trick people into doing what they could not bring themselves to do. But as the term began to gain ground once more after the march of the 5 million, we returned to it and we found in it a blueprint, a call to action. A call for social and environmental justice grounded in democratic governance and in intergenerational justice. In my 2050 world, governments have latterly become little more than rationing agencies, a small core assisted by an array of external expert agencies parcelling out the carbon budgets, the food rations, the public transport allowances and so on, not to mention managing the corruption scandals and the prosecutions that are a side effect of all the rationing. The haves have and the have-nots don't. Many people, of course, in my world already take pride in their communities and what they've been trying to build for the future from the ground up. But with central government mostly focused on rationing and security, we've lost the institutional means to connect policies across barriers of fractured community engagement. We've got the information technology, but that hasn't proved to be enough. Each community continues to make decisions for itself without much regard to the greater whole. And so, with grassroots demand ever more pressing, our Prime Minister announced a cabinet reshuffle. She announced the creation of a new Ministry for Future Generations, an entirely new ministry, not just another expert agency, a ministry to demonstrate the government's commitment to bringing the needs of future generations to the heart of government and the practice of democracy, from central government to the local level, with a position at every rationing table and a right to intervene as advocates for future generations in any relevant local or national decision-making process. My ministry started work 3 weeks ago in my world. We're in a good position now in 2050 to pull together as a collection of islands. The public is firmly behind the government. But we left it too late. Things are getting worse. I've sounded my warning, but what can I leave you with? What must I leave you with? I offer some insights and some suggestions for action. When I started to prepare for this speech, looking back to the time of my birth in 2011, I found that plenty of people had been thinking about the needs of future generations long before the 5 million marched. I looked back in time and I saw huge investment in environmental laws and institutions and policy initiatives to tackle poverty and build a less unequal society. And I can see that in your day, intergenerational fairness is already on the agenda. Some of it seems to me to be just words. I'm not saying that a Ministry for Future Generations should be the way forward for you, though it was right for us. It is right for us in my time. But when I see your current government talk about a horizon shift towards long-term thinking, I don't see that commitment linked to institutions designed to take account of the needs of future generations. I don't even see it linked to a clear sustainable development strategy. I found records of a UK Alliance for Future Generations which began its work in the year 2011. And I've read about the pioneering work of the Hungarian Parliamentary Commissioner for Future Generations. I'm so happy that you will hear from him yourselves today. And I hope that he will forgive me if I tell you that I watched his speech from my future world in the global YouTube repository, and it's really good. For some reason, my own speech is missing from that repository. My point is that the seeds of hope are there. People know deep down that what they hand down to future generations defines them. But too often your leaders, elected and unelected, seem to behave as though you only want what is best for your short-term gain. Show them that that's not true. Until change comes genuinely from the will of the people, it cannot and will not be enough to exert that constant push, those ongoing processes of discussion, reflection, and scrutiny that are needed to put us all on a path to sustainable development. It will be unstable. That's what we found. So make it your business to play a key part in expressing the will of the people. Your leaders will not do this alone. Show them that they are not alone. Rewrite the job descriptions of your leaders. Send them the new job descriptions. Write to your elected representatives and tell them that you want to see the needs of future generations built into government and policy processes. Tell them that future generations don't just need freedom from debt and a thriving economy. Use your economic crises as an opportunity to build a green and fair economy. Not just the pale business as usual add-on that I lived through, but a genuinely green and fair economy from top to bottom. Be a local guardian for future generations in your communities. Go along to your community's local meetings. Get involved in the online forums. Speak out about the history of your neighbourhood and how that links to its needs for the future and the needs of future generations. Ask others to take future generations into account. People will listen because you're likely to be saying things that deep down people all know. I'm not saying it's easy. There are difficult balancing acts. But you have a voice. Please use it for the sake of my future and yours. You are at a point in time when you could create institutions to bring the needs of future generations into the heart of your society. So seize the year. Don't do what we did in my future and leave it too late. Time is short. Let me conclude. If you take any action as a result of hearing from me here today, I know that the world that I walk into in the future, on my return to 2050, will be better than the world that I left behind to come here today. Thank you for listening.